Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper. Again, it's Sunday, and it's April 7th, 2019. We've been reeling with all kinds of basketball fun.
Yes.
But we'll talk about that later.
That's right. We'll get to that.
Meanwhile, let's catch up on our thespian pursuits.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, we went to a play this week. We went to The Cradle Will Rock at the Classic Stage. The Cradle Will Rock opening. What's that, Wednesday night?
Yes.
Wednesday night, yes. So The Cradle Will Rock is a curious thing, right?
Curious is a nice way to put it.
Yeah, well, it's a curious thing. Historically, it's interesting. So it comes out of a production by Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre Company in the late 30s, 1937, 1938. It's a play written by Mark Blitzstein, and it was, how shall we say, it's described by various people in reviews too as an agitprop. In other words, it is a play, which I've looked this up, which is for the purpose of political propaganda, particularly in theater, and in this case, political propaganda directed at the notion of the advantages of a socialist society, basically crying out against the injustices in the existing society of the late 1930s, where, of course, there was a lot of poverty and the country was reeling under a depression.
Well, it's about the development of unions.
More specifically,
extent.
exactly, yeah. Yes. But, you know, it's a broader agenda besides. But you're right, the play is focused on unions and the villain in the piece. And it's a very thinly veiled, as we say, political propaganda piece. So the villain of the piece is named Mr. Mister. The druggist is named Harry Druggist. They're all names like that. It's kind of
newspaper guys, Mr. Daly.
Exactly.
And what was the reception of the original?
What? What was the reception? It was, I'm not even sure. I mean,
they closed the damn thing down. They wouldn't even let it open. Tell the story.
No, yes, but that doesn't tell you what the reception is.
Well, tell the story.
All right.
Obviously, there was great apprehension.
Yes.
By somebody.
Right. So the story is that everyone knew that Blitzstein had written this play, which is a so-called play with music. In other words, he wrote a lot of songs, and it
was more like an opera than
a play. And
a singing play.
Yeah. A play with music. And as they were preparing it, word had gotten out that this company was going to be put on this really, in some person's views, anti-government play. And it was a theater company that was funded in large part by government money. So the authorities, perhaps, for a legitimate reason, perhaps not, found reason that the play should not go forward. And said that the theater wasn't ready, whatever. They gave some pretext for the play not being performed. And the theater was closed. And what Orson Welles and John Houseman, you remember John Houseman?
Barely.
Yeah, okay. He used to do the ads, we earn money the old-fashioned way.
Oh, right.
We
okay.
earn it,
right.
yes.
Continue with the story.
Yeah, so in any event, they decided they're going to stage the play anyway in this very odd way. They had all these rules that said that they couldn't perform. So
ironically, the unions won't let the performers perform,
right? Since
the show had been canceled or whatever.
Right. So because the actors are in a union themselves, they can't break the union rules. So they set up something outside the theater with a piano played by Mark Blitzstein, and the performers sat in the audience. So they weren't performers. They weren't actors.
They were doing their parts from their seat in the
audience. Right. So they'd play the piano, and someone in the audience would stand up and sing, as it happens. And that's the way they put it on.
So you know how old Orson Welles was when he was directing this?
He was in his 20s, I'm sure.
He was 22.
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
Well,
first of all, it's hard to believe he was ever 22, having seen him in various things in his older age.
But that's around the same time he did War of the Worlds, right?
Yeah, so this is,
War of the Worlds,
very creative.
I should say, War of the Worlds being that the broadcast, the radio broadcast, which was to the effect that the Martians...
Aliens are landing.
It landed in...
Princeton Junction.
Exactly. Right
New
near
Jersey,
us.
Right down the street from...
Yeah, so it's very strange. So in any event... So there's a strange history to the play, and it's a political play. And the question is, how does it come off today? And the answer is, it comes off as political propaganda. honestly. Obviously, it's done very professionally. It's classic stage and directed by John Doyle, and you have some very capable actors in it. But it's a tough road to hoe.
Actors.
It did have excellent actors, but it's a tough road to hoe. It's not My Fair Lady.
No. I mean, one of the key actors was Tony Yazbek.
Right.
And and a lot of the reviews said, but he didn't get to dance.
Yeah, he's a dancer. Right. I think what did he do? American in Paris, I think. Or what did he do? On the Town, on Broadway. Yeah, he's a great dancer, but he's a good singer. There's a lot of singing, and he's a strong presence. But it's an odd duck. It's not the kind of thing you see normally on Broadway or off Broadway.
So it was educational.
It was educational. It was interesting.
Told me something about the history of theater.
Yeah, well, here, it's funny. So I looked up to see, you want to talk about the reception at all or not?
Well, because it was opening night, there was a party afterwards.
Yes.
And that was the real fun for me because we accidentally rubbed elbows with all these luminaries by my standards.
As one does, right.
So there was Chuck Cooper, who was the headmaster in Choir Boy.
Right.
You spotted him right away.
Mm-hmm.
There was a person named Lynn Cohen, who has been in a lot of stuff, including Sex and the City, and she's got to be in her 80s. People were like genuflecting.
Yeah, we didn't know who she was.
Her.
Right.
And Don McKechnie was there, John Kander was there, and I spotted Dylan Baker and Becky Baker, his wife, whom I had just seen in a production of a play reading at the Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope. So I popped right up and said to them, "Oh, I just saw you in New Hope, Pennsylvania." And we had a nice chat. So
they must have been thrilled. How many people? First of all, how many people were at that performance in New Hope, and how many people would have been at that performance in New Hope and then been in New York on that night? Like nobody.
Like one.
Right.
And anyway, but that is part of the fun of belonging to an organization like Classic Stage Company, where you really it's a learning, it's an educational experience with the theater, even when it isn't Laugh a Minute. And it also, gets you the opportunity to be in a small space with people interested in theater, and some of them are famous.
Yeah. No, they're all interesting people. They're all very creative. It also gives you an insight into what it's like to be an actor or a director or someone. I mean, again, it's not necessarily always the most popular entertainment. You're doing art for art's sake or maybe for educational sake. It's different. It's not the way you normally think about it. It's not sitcom stuff.
Right.
So it's a different way to live your life. That's for sure.
Okay, so that was an interesting and educational experience. And meanwhile, we're also looking forward to tonight some less than educational experiences on the television, specifically Killing Eve.
It's the second season of Killing Eve,
which is a BBC?
Yes, BBC America
drama.
Yeah, Sunday night. Jodie Comer, Sandra Oh. And it was very well received last year. Super well received. It's
totally weird.
We discovered it.
It's
Someone heard about it on the podcast and then got a lot of acclaim.
And so, I guess so. I guess that must be it.
It's totally offbeat. It's about this assassin
so we're gonna,
the woman who stalks her.
Lose a few brain cells watching that.
Yes, just a few.
And you're also curious. Aren't you a little curious about
curious.
Fosse Verdon?
Yeah, curious is the right word. So there's a series called Fosse Verdon, and it's based on a book about Bob Fosse. Bob Fosse was famously married to Gwen Verdon. She's a great dancer. He's a great choreographer and dancer. And I think they decided that it was more politically correct to feature both of them in the title. But she's obviously a prominent part of his story. And it's interesting to me to see how they're going to do this. I mean, it's already been a great movie about Bob Fosse called All That Jazz, which might have been Best Picture. I have a vague recollection. It certainly was nominated. And here, so he's kind of a strange character. He's very
odd. A handful personality-wise.
Compelling guy. And great dancer and great stylist, but on the other hand, very self-destructive.
Is this a series or a miniseries?
I don't know how to pull those apart. I think it's a miniseries. It's just 6 episodes or something,
okay.
I believe. And it stars Sam Rockwell and Michelle Williams. Sam Rockwell's done a lot of interesting stuff. He got an Oscar just for 3 billboards. And you recall he was the bad sheriff guy.
And you
and
just
we've
saw
seen him
him
on Broadway.
Stage, didn't you?
Well, we saw him together in Sam Shepard thing a year or 2 ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
It was a while ago.
Right, but he's in stuff all the time. He's in a new movie, and Michelle Williams, of course,
Anyway,
very well known.
You're kind of interested.
Kind of interested.
You're not really Mr. Choreography.
Oh yeah, I am Mr. Choreography. That's not the issue. The question is whether the series is any good. It might be awful, so I'm not recommending. But I'm curious. You had the right word.
On the small screen. All right. So also on the small screen, we've been watching a fair amount of basketball. We watched the Final Four. And coming up to the Final Four, there was actually an article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about 2 of the Final Four teams have the same school colors. That would be Auburn and UVA. And so I read the story about how those 2 schools got their colors, and it's really kind of fun. UVA starts out with different colors. Mm-hmm. Actually, red and silver gray. Some people say that's meant to represent the blood on the Confederate gray uniforms.
That's what I thought of, yeah.
Okay. The problem is, when you're wearing those for sports on your uniforms, and you wash the uniforms, apparently the red would bleed into the gray.
Really?
And you'd end up with pink uniforms.
Well, that's...
And apparently the Cavaliers didn't go for that.
Really? Because, I will tell you right now.
So they need a new color. Where does it come from?
Where?
It comes from a fellow named Alan Potts. Alan Potts was, as the Wall Street Journal says, the Zion Williamson of the 19th century. He ran the 100-yard dash, 3-mile, broad jump, played second baseman for the baseball team, and was running back for the football team. Okay? He was a superstar. He goes one summer to Oxford, and he pals around. He tries out your favorite sport, rowing. Mm-hmm. Okay? And he pals around with the Grosvenor Rowing Club and ends up with a scarf with their colors, orange and blue. Okay, and so when he comes back to Charlottesville sporting the scarf, okay? So meanwhile, the whatever committee is trying to figure out what colors shall we change to, and somebody looks at, Mr. Popularity, Alan Potts, and says, how about this? Will this do? And holds up his Grosvenor Rowing Club scarf, and yes, so they adopt orange and blue. Okay. Meanwhile, a fellow named George Petrie has graduated from Virginia. He heads off to do graduate work at Johns Hopkins University, where a professor he has is kind of obsessed with this brand new sport, football.
Okay.
That professor is, you'll never get this, Woodrow Wilson.
Really?
Woodrow Wilson was obsessed with football. So Petrie learns all about football, and then when he gets a job at Auburn, okay, he starts a football team. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to figure out what color to use, and of course, naturally, there are a lot of reasons exactly how it came about, but naturally, he just says, okay, we can use orange and blue. That's a good, those are good colors. And so Auburn adopts orange and blue, the UVA colors, because, Petrie is an alum of UVA. Okay, there's one other funny little story, that goes with this. And that is that years later, a professor at Auburn takes some students to England, all right? And they visit the Grosvenor Rowing Club and regale them with the story of, how the colors came about at UVA and Auburn. And the Grosvenor Rowing Club lets them in on a secret, and that is their colors were not orange and blue.
Yeah, what were they?
They were gold and blue, but gold would be expensive to paint on your blades, on your the blades of your oars, right? So orange was as close as they could get.
All right. So,
but isn't that a fun story?
I will say that my high school, the colors were orange and blue. That when I worked at a camp, the colors were scarlet and gray, which is a perfectly good color combination.
It's surprising you didn't go to Auburn or UVA. How'd you end up at Princeton?
I don't understand. It wasn't for the colors. So Virginia played Auburn and won yesterday, right? Right. Yeah.
Right. Barely.
Yeah. And
only because people were ignoring various fouls.
Yes, that's true.
And incidences of a double.
Well, I tell you what was funny yesterday. I don't want to get into the specific games so much as, especially the second one between Texas Tech and Michigan. Michigan State wasn't very good. And here's what's interesting. People talk about the great talents that come up. And the great college talents only last a year and then they go into the pros. They're drafted after a year. And it's called one and done. You've heard that phrase. Right. And
in fact, there was a headline in one of the papers. Duke Zion is done.
Yeah.
Will it be Nick Zion or will he go on to the Knicks or something?
Oh, yeah. So it's one and done.
Are you getting it?
Yeah, I wasn't following it. But all I'm really saying is that Duke does one and done. They get all these guys that they know are going to play for a year. Kentucky does that. Several other teams do it. And the tournament, all the publicity is about these big stars. And in part because of what you're saying. In part because fans of the Knicks start speculating about these guys. There's all kinds of interest in their future going forward. What's interesting is, and I didn't realize this, the one and done guys don't decide the tournament. Because those teams get knocked out. You say, really? And that doesn't make sense. They're the biggest stars. But the last few years, none of the one and done players have gotten to the Final Four. And that includes this year. Duke got knocked out. Kentucky got knocked out. How can that be? Those are the big stars. And the answer is the other programs, which don't emphasize one and done, have players who play for 3 or 4 years. They're a little more mature, and those teams win. So they're not the most talented guys. They're not going to the pros. I don't know if anybody from Virginia is going to the pros, honestly. I don't think anyone from Texas Tech is going to the pros. But it makes a difference when you're dealing with a kid who's 21 or 22 years old or someone who's 18. They're just different. And they play these very big games. And you know something? They keep a head on their shoulders during the last 5 minutes when everyone's going insane. And those teams win the games. Virginia, it's like watching a bunch of bankers play basketball. Nobody looks terribly talented. But they seem terribly even-keeled. And that's why I think they're going to win the tournament.
Do you have any admissions to make about misjudging Duke?
Well, I thought Duke was most likely to win because of all that publicity. I also had a co-favorite Virginia. Virginia's still there. But, I never watched these teams during the year.
Well, let's just be frank.
Yeah.
You picked Duke.
But
you've got Virginia.
In the pool. Yeah, well, the reason is because you can't win a pool by picking Duke. Because everyone else picks Duke.
Well, you really can't now.
I can't.
You're right about that.
Yeah, Duke was a huge disappointment. I mean, they lost that game, but the previous 2 games they could have lost. And don't start me on Krzyzewski, the coach. They were a huge disappointment. But the real story is one and done's a headache. And when they asked Krzyzewski about why does team lose, what did he say? He said, we played very young. Yeah.
All right.
So they're 18.
I have just one more thing to say about school colors.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want the real story about why it's orange and blue?
Why?
Complementary colors.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
orange and blue. And they pop.
Yeah. Well,
in a way that gray and red don't pop.
Let me say this again. Jericho High School, the Jericho Jayhawks, orange and blue. So keep that in mind.
Got it.
Yeah. All right. So here's something, but just this half step to the side while everyone's going crazy about college basketball. A little less attention is being paid, but some, to esports. And
kids are raking in the bucks
by
playing esports.
So much so.
So it's not surprising.
It's professional.
That they're trying to get an edge.
It's professional. So there's a big article in the Times about gaming's new lifestyle: less pizza, more yoga, and they're trying to discipline the players on these teams. Apparently, the teams are comprised of people between the age of 18 and 24 years old. Who grew up playing video games, who for some reason have it in their heads that you go to sleep at 5 in the morning, wake up at 2, and have pizza all the time. That's not what these professional managers want to see from their team. So the article in the Times is about these two teams which are owned by a common owner. One is called Origin, O-R-G-I-N. They're not really long on vowels. The other is called Astralis, A-S-T-R-A-L-I-S. And what happens is that this guy was a trainer, got himself hired to straighten out the athletes on Astralis, and they became the all-time winning team in a game called Counter-Strike Global Offensive, earning $3.7 million in a year, which is a lot of money, I guess, under any circumstances. So he let him loose to train his other team, which is in the Legends League. And so he's now training this other group. And they've caught fire, too. They've won 11 out of their final 13 matches. And it's all because they have a whole regimen in terms of physical working out. They have regular meal times. They eat regular meals. And they're talking about they get them for breakfast. They give them salmon and vegetable omelet for breakfast. They have a trainer. They actually have a therapist they meet with once a week, if you can believe it. They have all kinds of stuff. They make them do their laundry. Mm-hmm. That's a new thing. Mm-hmm. And because they want them to seem more professional.
That's kind of a fabulous thing. So now mothers can say, to their young sons and daughters who are playing on the computer all day, you want to do your laundry. You want to be, a big famous player on the circuit like so-and-so.
You want to look like something.
They do their own laundry,
Right.
But it's interesting that, I guess the theory is that if you're in good sort of mental and physical shape, you have some kind of edge.
Oh, yes. And it's clear. Now, look, they have some special exercises. They have gaming-specific exercises. For example, the players wrap their fists inside elastic bands and flex their fingers as a regular exercise. So they'd be ready for the gaming.
Right.
They have neck exercises so that their energy doesn't flow.
But I gotta say, when I look for a computer expert, it's not, the fit body type I'm looking for.
No, you want to see someone who looks like they spend their whole time. I want to see somebody who has
been in the basement the whole time. I figure that's the guy who's going to help me out.
Well, you see, but when it comes
latest computer hole.
When it comes to betting on this kind of thing, you're going to change your view because it's the fit guys with the regular regimens that are going to start winning from now on. As they say, they sum it up here. They say, look, they're very much like soccer players, these folks. They have the same DNA. They're just not aware of it yet. So now they know.
Interesting. Did you pick that article just because you want to encourage any of your children to eat better?
No. I just the professionalization of everything. Nothing's safe. Not even the leagues that are dominated by guys who spend their whole time hunched over a computer. Even they are being straightened up. Everything's being cleaned up in this country.
So, speaking of cleaning things up.
Yeah.
In one of my favorite magazines, BBC History,
yes,
was a short history of vegetarianism.
Yes.
Okay. So it turns out that the choice to avoid animal products for spiritual and ethical reasons has a long history. Years ago in Europe, they used to call vegetarians Pythagoreans. Because apparently Pythagoras refused to eat slaughtered animals.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have that. Around the 19th century is when societies who are vegetarians start to form. One of the first formed in 1809 by a guy named William Cowherd. Interesting name for a vegetarian.
Yeah.
And then later in 1944, Donald Watson actually founds the Vegan Society. Mm-hmm. He was a woodworking teacher and a conscientious objector, a teetotaler, and he visited his uncle's pig farm, saw them being slaughtered, and never ate meat again. And he felt that cows were being exploited for their milk. So he stopped consuming dairy. Mm-hmm. That's what begins to make him a vegan. Now, he ends up avoiding medicines because of animal testing. And he only uses a fork to dig up the vegetables he grows, so he won't hurt the earthworms as he's digging. If you had a big giant spade. It's worth noting that he actually lives to be, I think, 95 years old.
Wow, that's good.
So he says it's because of the life he lived. Now, at a certain point, they're trying to figure out what to call themselves, because non-dairy vegetarian is too big a name, too big a mouthful. They also try Vitan, Dairy Ban, Benivore, all vegans, and they settle on vegan, which is can be explained a couple of different ways. As it's the first two and the last two letters of vegetarian. Got it?
Okay.
Vegan.
Yeah.
Also, apparently in London there was a very popular vegetarian restaurant named Vega or Vega.
Okay.
So maybe they were all vegan. But I thought that was kind of fun, that whole little history about what is a vegan and how did it get there. The guy's name was Donald Watson. May I just say, I had an uncle, Donald Watson.
Yes.
Not from England.
Very tall.
And he grew his own vegetables.
Is that right?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think he lived to be 92, but yeah. Okay. So there was an interesting article about time management. Not the kind of article that would normally attract my attention, honestly. But the theory here, this is a behavioral psychologist, is that, time management, the whole approach is often wrong. People say, if you're going to be good at time management, you got to budget your day. You make a schedule at the beginning of the day, 15 minutes for this, a half hour for that, 45 minutes for X, and you follow that. And that's all about being productive. Using your time in a productive fashion.
For years now, we've all been trying to cram as much into any day as we can. Okay? What I like from this article is a quote from E.B. White. Did you see that?
I did.
Let me just read that. E.B. White once wrote, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve or save the world and a desire to enjoy or savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day."
What did he wrote? Stuart Little or something? What did he write?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's a problem. How do you organize your day, right? And what this person says, which I think is quite interesting, is you organize things around what's really attracting your attention. In other words, he doesn't really put it this way, but this is the way I would put it. He says it's all about attention management. It's the art of focusing on getting things done for the right reasons, in the right places, at the right moments. In other words, to the extent you're thinking of doing something, what are you drawn to and why are you drawn to it? Or if you're not sure whether you want to do it, think about why it might be worth doing or it might not. And as you go through this process, you're going to identify reasons that would make the task more compelling, let's say. And that's what draws you into doing it. And it's only by determining why you're compelled to do it or thinking about why you're attracted to do it or regard as significant, are you going to succeed in doing it in a so-called productive and efficient way. And if you take it even a step backwards, and there's some discussion of this too, it's a matter of deciding what are you really drawn to? What's on your mind? What's in your subconscious? What's driving you? And might say, I feel like doing something creative. I really want to think about X and Y. Do that. And then when the time comes, your mind will naturally get into a different kind of a rhythm where it's more ready to do mundane tasks or whatever. Don't obsess about doing any particular task in any particular time slot. Go with what you're compelled to do with some thoughtfulness about what would make the task compelling. And I don't know, does that make any sense to you?
No, it doesn't help me at all because I think you're naturally drawn to do the stuff you want to do.
Well,
okay? Chores.
Yeah.
I don't want to write the checks, pay the bills, do.
Well, let me give you an example.
Housekeeping.
So this fellow says, he said, look, I didn't, I should give the fellow named Adam Grant. He said, look, and I said to myself, do I want to write this article for the New York Times? He couldn't get excited, couldn't get going about it, right? But he was thinking about a leadership class that he gave, in which this fellow that he gives the name of Michael was unsettled and was looking for advice and was quite troubled about how he should go about being more productive and organizing his day. And he started giving more thought, how can he help Michael? And the article became about how he can help Michael. what advice would he give Michael? That he could find compelling. That's something he could get behind, and that's what got him to write this, which became the article.
He also says, do the big creative projects when you're at the height of your powers.
That's true.
So if you're a morning person, attack that then.
But what's confusing is some people are morning.
And then you do the crap you don't want to do. You do when you're half asleep in the afternoon. I'm not really sure how all this.
I kind of do that too, but then he says circadian rhythms are different for different people. Some people at the height of their powers in the afternoon. So
right. He said so. Plan to do the creative big stuff then.
At the very least, don't obsess about being productive in the sense of making things go every minute. Just thinking from a task-based perspective.
I think he's also partly saying it's not how much you do, it's what you do.
Yeah, and the quality of it.
And we need to step back and be mindful of that.
Yeah, okay.
Speaking of some really excellent time management,
yes,
comes to mind the great Michelangelo once again. All right, fantastic article.
Yeah.
In the Wall Street Journal magazine.
Yeah.
A beautiful photo spread of the Sistine Chapel. And the guy who's writing it, Cullen Murphy, actually goes up in, like a cherry picker.
Yeah.
And gets to see up close and personal the Sistine Chapel ceiling, etc. So he has a fantastic experience. The article is called Divine Intervention. Let me say that right. Divine Intervention. And it's all about maintenance. It's about the preventive conservation of the Sistine Chapel.
I'm surprised they let him do that. So they brought the cherry picker into the Sistine Chapel, and
it is in there.
Oh.
One of the things they need to do, and for a month after the doors close every night, they go through the whole chapel, check everything out. They have 25,000 people coming through that chapel every day. Okay? They bring with them all kinds of moisture and perhaps bacteria. CO2 when they're breathing. All these people, heat, etc. So all these visitors, millions of visitors, 7 million visitors a year, will make an impact on the frescoes. Now, they restored the frescoes in the 80s and 90s. They actually took off old layers of repairs and dirt and grime and did repairs to the cracks, etc., so that the Sistine Chapel changed dramatically in appearance during that period. But the problem now is to maintain the progress and to keep reviewing the walls for things like, salts build up on the surface. When those salts build up, then it makes like a fog over the true colors of the fresco. So they remove that, and the way they do it is quite interesting. They, will go up where they have to go up, and with a piece of Japanese paper, undyed, very pure paper, they kind of a big size, 19 by 30 inches. They put that against the fresco. They dampen it with distilled water using a brush and leave it on for 3 minutes and then peel the paper off, hoping that dust and salt, etc., comes off with the paper. If more intervention is needed after that, it will follow. But it's interesting. I actually knew about this process. I had read about the original restoration in the 80s and 90s was started out with this very simple process. But also you can do it at home if you have a fresco that needs attention. You can, a conservator once told me, you just dampen some toilet paper and stick it up.
That's not going to work.
Well, yeah, it does.
But
it does.
It's not...
You can use it on, if you have, a brick fireplace, and maybe there's a smoky area of the mortar between the bricks, you can stick up wet toilet paper on that mortar.
But you're not going to pull it off. It's going to fall apart.
It mashes together wet. Once it dries, it comes right off.
Really? Okay.
And takes with it surface smoke, etc.
All right.
So anyway, so it's a beautiful article, beautiful to see, very interesting to read about the advanced technology used in exchanging the air and trying to maintain these beautiful works. And of course, it's always interesting to think about what that work of art looked like before they restored, when everything was dull and brown and depressing looking, and then after it was cleaned up, entirely changed our 20th century, 21st century understanding of the colors that Michelangelo used. So that's a great article. Cullen Murphy in the Wall Street Journal magazine. And it also engaged a lot of fun comments in the in the comment area of the online newspaper.
Okay.
People said funny things.
Good.
So
like
no, well,
not worth repeating.
There's a long rant about Michelangelo's people not wearing enough clothing. And,
oh, really?
And what was done about that, and what are they trying to hide? He keeps saying. But anyway, that's a subject for another time.
Okay. All right.
And I have more? Yes, I have more. Museum update. Okay. And this was a little mention in the Wall Street Journal of an upcoming silver exhibition at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence.
RISD, yeah.
And down the street from RISD was a very famous silver company, Gorham. And they are putting on a show, basically the history of Gorham silver. And it starts May 3rd. It's going to go through December. And it's called Changing... Oh, no, what is it called? I don't even know what it's called. It's basically the Designing Brilliance, I guess. The history of Gorham silver. It's also going to travel to Cincinnati and to Charlotte, North Carolina. So keep your eye out if... you're in that part of the country. Maybe you'll get a chance to see it. Also, at the same Rhode Island School of Design is an ongoing exhibition called Changing Reflection, a look at silver metalwork and jewelry from the 19th and 20th centuries, which would be a nice complement to that. You know, Providence is a fun town to go to. I mean, it's been through some hard times, but it has famously good pizza, right?
Yeah.
And
no, it's fun. I like Providence.
Yeah, we stayed in a funky hotel, a hip hotel.
Hip, well, yeah.
The Dean.
Hip hotels. We went to a basketball game. It was they have doors.
Really
nice
excellent restaurant.
Yeah, that's right.
Gracie's, very.
And there's a new one that opened there too that we had heard about, but we haven't been there. Yeah, it's an interesting food scene. Remember, I told someone relocated.
We got to get back there. Yeah. So. Maybe we will.
No, I like
Providence, Rhode Island.
Well, it's an interesting combination of an old-time working town that's been sort of redone and reborn in some respects.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Full of all kinds of political corruption and difficulties.
That's the story of Rhode Island. It's old-time Italian politics. All right, so speaking of old-time Italian, we have two obituaries, both Italian-Americans. Joe Bellino died. Joe Bellino... Some people are listening saying, oh my God, Joe Bellino died. And other people are saying, who? That'll be most everybody. Joe Bellino was a college football player at Navy. He won the Heisman Trophy. The man won the Heisman Trophy. How could he be forgotten? He won in 1960. People always remember Roger Staubach as the great naval football hero who won the Heisman Trophy in 1963. Well, 3 years earlier, Joe Bellino did it. So Roger didn't do anything new.
Roger Staubach is close to 81?
Yeah.
That seems
That's an interesting point.
Unbelievable.
He's 78.
Oh my gosh.
But in any event, Bellino was... but college football was so different. I mean, Bellino was a running back for Navy. He weighed 180 pounds. He won the Heisman by an overwhelming point total when he was summoned from his electrical engineering class by the Rear Admiral.
As one does.
As one does. And Bellino said, I'm very pleased. So there... And then he went into the Navy because it used to be you had a military commitment.
Sir. Very pleased, sir.
Exactly right. Spends 4 or 5 years in the Navy, and then he comes out and he decides he's going to give pro football a shot. as you'd expect, but it unfortunately doesn't work out. I mean, he's just not really good enough to play professional football the way he put it. He said he had lost his passion for the game. I guess that could happen, right?
Yeah.
But he hung around for 4 or 5 years without passion. And then he got into the catering business. And he bounced around, honestly. But he did all right. He was always an upstanding guy. Good naval career. What's interesting, though, you think about him from a previous era. I mean, you know, you can't relate to it, except for one thing. There are these connections. And the connection is that there was this young fan, one of his biggest fans, when he was at the Naval Academy, was, you guessed it, Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick's father, as you may know, was an assistant football coach at Navy.
Oh, I had no idea.
And Bill Belichick was so enamored of Bellino that he used to hang around all the time, so much so that when Bellino graduated, he gave his midshipman's cap
to the young Belichick?
To the young Bill Belichick.
Ah.
And Bill Belichick did give it back 50 years later, as he said, because it belongs in the Bellino family. But so there's a connection with Joe Bellino. Certainly Bill Belichick, highly aware of Joe Bellino.
That's fun.
Yeah. And talk about Italian-American, the final piece is about a guy named Mike Greco, who was known as the Salami King of Little Italy. He had a place on Arthur Avenue. And it was one of these big Italian groceries, right?
Little Italy in the Bronx.
Little Italy in the Bronx.
And we have had some great times on Arthur Avenue.
Yes.
Because it happened to be close to a couple of sports venues for us.
Right.
It's right next to Fordham, where we used to go to water polo games quite a bit. And also not too far from Columbia's football stadium, where you would see your nephew Sean play football.
Play football. And this guy, you know, he had exactly what you'd expect. They had, you know, this very, I'm looking at the photo, and you had seen it before, of this grocery with all the cured meats hanging down from the ceiling, all the salamis and whatever, and the prosciutto. Or
salumi, as we say.
Yes, salumi, right. But what's interesting about this is, you know, and he poses in his own view, his Mussolini-type pose, with a cigar, a very fearsome figure. He would go to his market 7 days a week, 6 a.m. He came from Calabria, a Calabrian immigrant, and that was his life. He passed away at 89, made a great success, and he was a ruler with an iron fist. So as it happened, his son writes a play about it, and the play is called Behind the Counter with Mussolini. About his dad being Mike Greco, right? Yeah. And which depicts the struggle between an industrious immigrant father, if you can believe it, and a rebellious son who goes to college and discovers a world beyond the counter of the family's deli. And it was produced in various small theaters in New York in the late 1900s. And what's funny about it is Mike Greco liked the play. He liked the play, even though he's sort of shown in a somewhat harsh light. And it's interesting, his quote is kind of very revealing. The man, Mike Greco, who spent his entire time behind the counter, he said, here's the quote, talking about his son. He says, by himself, he discovered I gave him something good. The play, it's 100% true. That's why it makes me a proud father. He finally found out who is Michael Greco. Which is kind of interesting because, you know, as a father, as a parent, it's interesting to see if your children ever bother to find out who you are, you know?
Oh, I don't want them to know who I am. I think some things are better left unknown.
Well, that might be. But Mike Greco wasn't disturbed by it, and he was quite pleased by it. So there you go.
Well, that's a nice story.
It is a nice story. So,
all right, so I'm salivating. We better run to dinner.
We have to. So the tournament's tomorrow night. You're going to pick a winner between Virginia and Texas Tech?
Well, I understand our family fortunes are riding on Virginia.
That's right. We're going to have a whole new microphone next week. Yeah, Virginia. Although... it is funny. I mean, these teams...
So you know what that means, listeners. Run out right now. Put your money on Texas Tech.
Yeah, you know, it's just we were talking about a moment ago. The idea of these more mature players. You know, the star player from the last game for Texas Tech is what's called a graduate assistant. The guy who had some eligibility left, who graduated college some years ago, 24 years old. He was the big star. He's not going to play professional basketball, I'll tell you right now. But it's different when you're 24 than when you're 18.
You know what this series has taught me? Anything could happen.
Well, that's true, too.
All right, on that note, this is Tamsen Granger.
And this is Dan Abuhoff.
We'll see you next week with Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper. Adios.